Hey guys, welcome to the benchmark video for my new Ryzen 9 3900X. Now, this is going to be quite a long video, I suspect, because there's a lot to go through. So buckle up and, well, let's go through the first slides, because I made a slideshow of this, and see what the specifications are. So I upgraded from my... I'm going to look to the right a lot because my screen is there. I upgraded from my 1700X, which I've been running for the past 2.5 years at 4 GHz. So I'm going to compare that and the graphs I made at that time and benchmarks I made of the 1700X last month to see how it performed 2.5 years later, including the benchmarks of my 4770K from way back with the Ryzen 9 3900X stock and overclocked, or rather not overclocked, but I should say boosted. But I'll get into that in a moment. The specifications for the new PC are the following. I'm using an Asus Crosshair 8 with the newest AGESA, so that's 1003, ABB. And then of course the Ryzen 9 3900X, 32 gigs of memory in two 16GB sticks, and this is memory I already had, so it's a bit slow for Ryzen, but I was able to manually tune that to make it a lot better. But officially it's 2933 MHz memory at a cache latency of 16. For storage, in the last benchmarks and in this benchmark, I used a 1TB Samsung 970 EVO Plus, and the cooler is still the same. Now, there might be an issue with that cooler, or rather with all the AIOs, because the chiplets that are on the core aren't in the center anymore like they used to be for normal processors, but they're more on the side. Now, temperatures are in check, but I need to run my fans harder than I thought I would need to, because the chip in total is generating less heat than the 1700X at 4 GHz was. That was generating about 180 watts. And this one is topping out at 160 watts, but it still gets hotter. So that's probably something to do with the heat or cold plate on the AIO cooler. And I'm going to try and rotate that to see if that provides better cooling or not. Now, if you have a normal air tower cooler, you're probably not running into this issue. But if you buy an AIO for one of the new Ryzens, make sure you get one that, well, fits correctly over the chiplets. And I'll be doing more testing with that later, and if it indeed makes a big difference, I'll make a video about that. Continuing the specifications, I still have my GTX 1080. I'm running the newest build of Windows 1903 with all patches installed. And the NVIDIA drivers are also the newest that were available for download at this time. So I have two benchmarks, or two sets of benchmarks included for the Ryzen 9 3900X. Those are the stock settings and then the boosted settings, as I call them. So that's not really a manual overclock. I've tinkered with that, but the boosted settings provide, well, some advantage over manually overclocking. So with boosted, I mean I'm running the CPU with PBO, Precision Boost Overclocking, enabled, so that basically the chip overclocks itself. And I'm running custom memory timings on my 2933 MHz memory. That allowed me to boost the memory all the way up to 3600 MHz with a cache latency of 19. But because I'm using the magic settings, I would call them, from the Ryzen memory clocking tool, this actually comes out very well. But we'll see that in the benchmarks. So here are those settings listed again. And as you can see in Hardware Info 64, you can see that a few cores boost to 4.55 gigahertz. Or something like that, and it really depends on the load that's on the chip. All core load is between 4 and 4.1 gigahertz, and single core mode or few core load is around 4.3, 4.5, or even 4.55. So I believe it's boosting correctly from everything I gather from the internet, and well, it's pretty fast. So this is it for now. If this really changes in the future with BIOS updates or something else, I'll let you guys know. So again, mentioned as I did in my previous videos, I'm using all the binaries I collected in 2017 when I upgraded from my 4770K to my 1700X, because I kind of want to see what performance, how it has progressed over time. Now there are some benchmarks which won't allow you to run the old binaries, and I have included a few newer benchmarks just to keep current, okay? Let's get started with the CPU benchmarks. And first up is our well-known Cinebench R15. As you can see, the new chip is actually for the first time faster in single core performance than a 4770K was, especially the overclocked one. It's close, but at least now, even stock, it beats a processor from 5 years ago. So that really shows the IPC improvement that AMD has made with the new Ryzen over the old one. Looking at multi-core performance, of course, the 4770K was a 4-core processor, the 1700X was an 8-core processor, and this is a 12-core processor. But combined with the IPC improvements and the higher clock speeds, we get almost double the performance. It's not quite double, but it's really close. So this is an awesome improvement in rendering workloads and stuff like that. Another thing of note is that the graphical benchmarks are back up. So you can see that with my 4070K overclocked, I got 140 FPS during the OpenGL benchmark, but I was never able to match that on the 1700X. Now with the 3900X, especially the overclocked, I get 143 FPS. So that basically means that the 1700X had some inefficiencies or latencies and other issues that it couldn't feed the graphics card with all the information it could potentially handle. And, well, this is the fastest combination yet. So the graphics card is exactly the same, it's not overclocked, and it's back up to the levels of the 4770K again. So that bodes very well for gaming performance. Looking at R20, we kind of see the same thing. I don't have 4770K benchmarks for this, but single core over the 1700X, even overclocked like I did last month, to the 3900X has improved with at least 100 points, and multi-core has almost doubled. So that's awesome. Here you can also see that Precision Boost Overdrive and the better memory timings certainly make a difference. It's only 200 points, but still. Looking at Corona, we basically see above perfect scaling, where an overclocked 4770K did 3 minutes 50, the overclocked or PBO boosted Ryzen 9 3900X managed to do it in 1 minute and 9 seconds. That's more than 3 times as fast. So rendering workloads, this thing is just the new champion of desktop processors. There's nothing that comes close. I know I don't have a 9900K and stuff like that, and those will probably do a lot better than my 4770K, but still, it only has 8 cores, and this one has 12, so even in regards to the 9900K, the 3900X will kill it in these workloads. Looking at Handbrake, we see the same thing. It's a lot faster, and again, the manual timings and PBO gave us about a frame extra per second. Still, it's something. Looking at Geekbench, we see that the score basically, improves linearly, and, especially the PBO and boosted timing version of the 3900X is well and above the rest. If you're running one of the new Ryzen 3000 series or even a 2000 series, check out the Ryzen DRAM calculator, because as I said, I was able to time it from 2933 to 3600, and with that, especially for the Ryzen 9 series or Ryzen 7 series, the 3000 series, you can also up the FCLK. So FCLK should generally be half the speed of your memory. So when I'm running at like 3000, that would be 1500 megahertz. But when I'm running my chips or my memory at 3600, you can clock it at 1800, and it'll give you quite a good boost in especially 3D workloads, games, and stuff like that. Now there's lots of videos out there explaining that, but look up FCLK and Ryzen Memory Tool, and BuildZoid from Actually Hardcore Overclocking actually has some good videos explaining why this is, and he did a lot of testing. I'll link his videos in the description below, so go check those out if you wanted optimize your memory, basically. User benchmark shows a good improvement over the single core. It's now faster than the 4770K finally. And in multi, well, it's of course faster, but the boosted version didn't really do much. For CPU-Z, and I'm using the original CPU-Z from 2017 here, we see a good improvement over the old Ryzen, and the boosted version is marginally faster, but not that much. Super PyMod basically shows off processor latency, and here we can see that the overclocked 4070-70K is still able to do this faster than our boosted Ryzen 9 3900X can. But it's certainly better than the old one was, and with the new chiplet architecture, there's bound to be some inter-chip and CCD and CCX latency, so that they actually managed to improve it from the 1700X is, well, a pretty big achievement in my book. W prime, we see a good improvement over the 1700X, but it still can't beat the 4770K, unless of course we use the more threads that we now have available. But it's still, again, better than the 1700X, and as I said, that's a really good achievement because the layout they chose actually makes latency harder, so they really improved that part of the chip. Okay, let's move on to GPU benchmarks. Now, GPU benchmarks are interesting. If you look at the 3D Mark Vantage chart, you see that graphics and physics has become a lot higher than it was before. And that is, again, because the 1700X couldn't really handle the 1080 or feed it fully that it was capable of. You see that the overclocked 4770K in graphics came close to 70,000, but the new 3900X actually pushed it beyond 70,000. So they really made some big improvements in 3D graphics pipeline and latencies and stuff like that. You'll certainly be getting the highest performance possible out of your selected graphics card. In 3D Mark Ice Storm Extreme, we basically see the same thing. The older processor, the 1700X, even overclocked, wasn't able to feed the graphics card at its maximal rate. Now, these are very low-end benchmarks, so it wasn't really a bottleneck. It's like the difference between 2000 FPS and 2500 FPS. But if you're doing high refresh rate gaming at low resolutions, this might be important to you. But you'll see that once we go up the ladder in benchmark complexity, this difference will come down. So if you were, for instance, gaming in 1440p, this difference wasn't really a problem. But if you went for the raw FPS values, the older or Intel architecture was just faster. But the 3900, or at least for the 4070-70K, has really caught up. And the 9900K really only has about 5 to 10% IPC improvement against the 4770K. So both chips are now very well suited for gaming. So in Firestrike, we already see that the graphics benchmarks isn't really higher. That's because the resolution is higher and the CPUs were able to saturate the graphics performance anyway. We do see a very high boost in multi-core physics calculations because, well, there's more cores and clock speeds and stuff like that. So the total score is also higher. In Firestrike Extreme, we basically see the same thing. Physics is a lot higher, but since graphics doesn't really change because the graphics card was getting saturated anyway, total stays about the same. And well, it's been said for Ultra, basically the same thing. And another synthetic benchmark, well, physics is higher, the rest is about the same deal. Looking at VR Mark, we see we achieve a lot higher frame rate in the orange room because it's basically a very low complexity test, and the CPUs before weren't able to saturate the graphical power that the GTX 1080 was able to provide. But the blue room showed something weird. For some reason, in the non-boosted version, I got a much higher value than I got before. I think this was an erroneous value. I wasn't able to test it again. So I think we can kind of disregard that. Heaven, again, shows a very high improvement in basic. But once we up the quality and the complexity to extreme or custom, which the details are listed below, we basically see this difference disappear because all the CPUs before it were able to saturate the GPU. And in the average FPS graph, we basically see the same thing. The 1700X and the 4070-70K were already able to saturate the graphics card. So even with the extra horsepower of the 3900X, it really makes no difference. But if you have, for instance, an RTX 2080 Ti, it might have, even if you had a decent processor before. Okay, let's move on to GPU benchmark, but then games. Quake 2 The Reckoning, it's kind of old, and it really gave me a hard time trying to benchmark it. It worked on the 1700X. For some reason, the results I'm getting on my 3900X are a lot lower. I don't know why, and I kind of really just want to disregard this slide, because anything else shows it's being faster, even single core. So I don't know what's going on here. Maybe it's just less efficient running this code. I don't know. This is code from like 15 years ago or something like that. So ashes of the singularity. Again, in the low GPU focused benchmarks, it shows a great improvement because there's a lot more CPU horsepower available to drive the graphics card, and it scores almost double as high as it did before. And the CPU-focused high benchmark also, of course, scores higher because the CPU is, again, a lot more powerful. Looking at Civilization, I did a lot of tests, and we already saw that about a month ago, the 1700X, I think they optimized Civilization itself. I can't really choose an older build, so I have to do it with the newest build of the software. So there were some major gains there. But looking at the graphics benchmark, again, the 3900X, especially the boosted variant, really shows some performance gains. And if we move over to the AI benchmark, well, it really doesn't seem to scale above 8 cores. So you see the IPC and clock speed improvement, but it doesn't seem to want to use more than 8 cores. So there is some improvement there, but not a lot. Okay. Well, there are some other benchmarks left. Checking memory throughput, we see that with 2 bytes and 4096 bytes, the normal version at 293 CL16 is actually faster, or has a higher throughput, but at 64 bytes my boosted version is. And if we then move on to memory latency, you can see that the latency for the boosted version with the optimized timings from the DRAM calculator is a lot better, which can explain the better gaming and 3D benchmark results. Okay, well, here's something I do a lot, and that's video rendering, hence this YouTube channel. And let's go back to Vegas Pro 12 and see what that software can do for us with the new Ryzen 3900X. Well, we can see that from the overclocked benchmarks I did about a month ago, it's a lot faster without a GPU assistance for the compositing, and with GPU compositing, it's still a lot faster. It's really something to see something that needed 51 minutes before now take 25 minutes. But it gets even better, because if we move on to Vegas Pro 16 and use the same project file, where it used to take 52 minutes, the fastest version, and now encoding with HEVC with NVENC, only takes 8 minutes and 39 seconds. So that's a huge leap, and basically makes rendering video 5 to 8 times faster, given what your project does and the amount of effects and stuff like that. Looking at just this chart, we see that even upgrading from the 1700X to the 3900X gives us a great improvement, especially without the GPU assistance and software encoding. The new CPU just has a lot more cores and clock speed, so it's a lot faster. But even if we use GPU encoding and GPU compositing, the 1700X managed 11 minutes and 17 seconds, while the 3900X in the boosted variant managed 8 minutes and 39 seconds. So that's still a pretty good improvement. Now, since making these benchmarks, Magix has released Vegas Pro 17, which also brings GPU decoding next to encoding, which I use here. And I'll try and make a dedicated video to show what kind of performance impact that has and if it's any faster than using a fast CPU or not. But that's going to be a video in the future. I included Nova Bench in my previous benchmarks, but for some reason on the 3900X, even with the newest GSA code, I can't run it. It doesn't finish, gives me an error, don't know what's going on. Passmark performance test does run and shows a huge improvement in CPU and in disk benchmarks. And an interesting thing here is that the same SSD was used in the 2019-07 1700X benchmarks and this one. And even between the non-boosted and the boosted version, there's a slight difference, but we'll get to some disk benchmarks later on. But it's interesting to see that the same SSD is a lot faster in the 3900X machine. PC Mark 8 sees a nice little uptick, but this is mostly very light desktop workloads and stuff like that. So it's more IPC improvements and the extra cores aren't really used. Still, it beats the 14770K overclocked, so there's certainly been some gains in clock speed and IPC, so that's awesome. Okay, let's take a look at Addo benchmark, and this is basically what I was talking about before. As you can see, the 1700X managed okay speeds with larger sizes, but looking at the graph, you see that the 3900X is able to push the same SSD a lot faster because, well, I don't know, it's not PCI Generation 4 because the SSD only supports Gen 3, but even the normal and the boosted variant, although the normal variant had a higher throughput, the lower latency of the memory configuration actually seems to help, pushing out performance even more, especially around the 16 kilobyte value. It's an easy 180 megabytes faster than it was in the non-boosted state. And especially the 4K compared to the 1700X is a giant improvement. So even for storage, this seems to make a pretty big difference. Looking at Anvil, also a storage benchmark, we see that read is a little bit faster, but not that much. But writes have become a lot faster, and well, that also influences the total. It's also here again, you see the difference between the normal and the boosted version, where PBO, Precision Boost Overdrive, and the better memory timings seem to make quite a good difference. And well, last graph is power usage. So this chip is a lot faster, but how much power does it use? Well, in its normal non-overclock boosted state, it's doing very well. Idle, it basically uses less than any of the systems before it. Even the 4-core 4070K at stock used more than the 12-core 3900X. So that's really an awesome feat. Looking at a 12-core load, we see that stock is above 4070K, of course, but it has 3 times as many cores, and for this benchmark also 3 times the performance. But it's only using a little bit more power. So the process node in improvements are really shown off here. Looking at our power supply test, well, it's kind of the same, especially in the boosted and overclock state as the 1700X before that. And even in the boosted state, it goes above that to 450 watts pulled from the wall socket. So performance comes at a cost if you enable all the features in overclock and stuff like that. But it's also a lot faster, so if your render only takes 12 minutes instead of 30 minutes, and during those 12 minutes it uses 450 watts, but it doesn't use 400 watts for 30 minutes, that's actually a really big improvement. So, those are the benchmarks, and well, my conclusions are that power efficiency and performance has improved a great deal. Even moving from a 1700X overclocked to a boosted 3900X has showed a really big improvement in gaming benchmarks and, for instance, my Vegas rendering workloads. I think those are partially because of IPC improvements, but also because of clock improvements and latency improvements in the chip. And as I said before, I think it's a really big feat that AMD was able to pull this off and basically jump Intel ahead of the race. And as has been stated by many others, they basically don't have an answer right now. Now, don't count Intel out. I'm sure they'll be back with something, but also that's probably going to take at least 2 years or even more to develop a new architecture to basically beat the one that AMD has presented now. For me, I'm finally free to move the old motherboard from my desktop workstation to my new server I'm building, and as long as CPU iterations are going as they're doing now, I plan on doing the same thing every 2-3 years. So basically, if I upgrade my desktop anyway every 2-3 years, I can upgrade my server for free after that. So next videos on the channel are probably going to be about the server, but also some LED content and maybe some more benchmarks and stuff like that. If you have any questions regarding this video, regarding the benchmarks or something else you'd like me to test, let me know down in the comments. And well, this video has been quite long enough, so I thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.